Hello. Yes, that's right. It's Joe here for Joyrider TV once again, back with the Q&A. And yeah, some sort of internet problems my end, but I switched it off and turned it back on again. Hopefully that will be enough. All right, so just having to open up a few things. Thank you for your patience, and we will get this thing going once again. All right, yeah, so first question preloaded from Rich regarding sailing downwind with the spinnaker up. And just to summarize the question, what are the optimal angles that we should be sailing with the spinnaker up? We're going to talk about it in terms of wind strength, because it does change according to the wind strength. So if we just sort of take it that the true wind is coming from the top here, so we're going to use our wind arrow here to show the apparent wind. So when the wind is really light, we're very much looking to sail the boat on the downwind course in a bit more of on a traditional catamaran sailor's broad reach. So that is with the apparent wind coming straight across the boat. So this apparent wind is the combination of the true wind and the wind that we're creating by moving forwards. And the reason why we're saying, because this is the lowest, the furthest downwind that we can sail whilst still having a flow of air. Like if we get the spinnaker in here, getting a flow of air over all of the sails, so both sides of the sail. So we can see by having it here, we're getting a nice over both sides of the sail. If we sailed any deeper downwind like this, then we wouldn't get a flow of wind over both sides of the sail. All of the air would just be going into the spinnaker. We'd be getting a turbulent, I don't think you'd call it a flow of air, but we're getting turbulence on the inside of the spinnaker, which means that we wouldn't be making the most of the sails on the boat, and it would be creating a lot of drag, very slow way to sail. So that is as low as we're ever going to go. So in light winds, we are starting off with the apparent wind coming across the boat at 90 degrees. And if the wind is really super light, then the crew on the spinnaker sheet should be communicating with the helm. And if the crew isn't feeling like they have any pressure at all in the spinnaker sheet, then if we use this one now, then we just need to turn a little bit closer to the wind until the crew starts feeling that pressure in the sheet. And then once we've got to that sort of wind strength, we are then just using the pressure as our guide to what angle we should be sailing. So we'll feel a very definite change from, say, for example, from sailing in this direction to sailing in this direction. So if we're sailing there, we'll feel like the boat's not really getting much benefit from having the spinnaker up. We're not feeling much power, much pressure in the sheet, or much speed. But if we just turn a few degrees higher, you'll feel a definitive angle where the speed comes on. And then that is the angle that we should be starting our run on. And then we're trying to hold it with that much power for the whole of our downwind leg. So if we get a gust of wind, the boat is going to go faster, which is going to create more induced wind, which is going to bring the apparent wind further forwards. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, which means to keep the apparent wind on the same angle, we can then turn a little bit more downwind. Again, we're feeling to have this amount of power on the boat consistent. So we'll turn downwind. So when we get this extra power, when the wind gets to about 6 knots, it's not much, but it's enough to get things moving. When the wind gets to about 6 knots, the hull might lift. So if the hull starts lifting, what we're going to do is we're just going to turn very gently downwind, not so that the hull starts coming back down, but just so it stops going any higher. Because what we're trying to achieve, our ultimate goal on the downwind point of sail with the spinnaker, is to be sailing on the downwind leg with the windward hull of the boat out of the water, just so that the hull is occasionally just kissing the top of the waves, so that we're reducing the amount of friction from the hulls. So then we're just trying to steer the boat to keep that amount of pressure, that amount of power consistent as we sail through the variations in the wind strength. So when we get to that stage, we're no longer really paying much attention to the wind indicators at the front of the boat, and we really are just steering to the amount of power that we need. And that continues basically into the stronger wind, where again you'll feel a very a definite point where so strong wind, let's go to the other end of the scale. Strong wind will start off by hoisting and coming very much from behind us. That's going to be the easy point to hoist the spinnaker. And then once it's up and we're settled on the boat and we're comfortable, we're just going to turn the boat very slowly towards the wind. And when we feel that it gets to that point that the power comes on, so we're turning very slowly, because if we turn quickly, we might get more power on than we want. And then we'll have this sort of thing going on where we're going up and down, controlling the power. But if we turn slowly until we get that amount of power where we feel the speed increase to the amount that we would like, then we'll hold it there. And again, we're going to steer for those variations in the wind strength. So when we're going on this downwind leg, we can also, if it's quite a gusty wind, we can also anticipate the gusts which are coming. So if, for example, it's very gusty, we want to be looking kind of like in this direction, because the gusts that are going to affect us are the ones that are over here, because this gust is going to be traveling this way. We're going this way. So if we see a gust over here, we're going to end up in that gust. So if we can see by the color of the water, perhaps we can see there's some white horses in that gust, then perhaps before that gust even hits us, turn a few degrees downwind, so that will just take the sting out of it a little bit, and we'll be less likely to stick the nose in or feel a little bit like we've got a bit on when we go into that gust. I'd just like to say a big shout out to channel member Jens, who's just joined and gone straight in with a super sticker or super chat. Super stickers and super chats that is helping to keep the Q&A ad free. No ads in the Q&A. It's the new thing, and I think it's good. All right. Yeah, so that's where we're looking for the gust. And yeah, and once we're in the gust, then we'll have a better idea of how much power we can manage. So we might bring it back up a little bit if we feel that we can manage a bit more power in that gust. So the key points here are we're going to start off deep downwind, and we're going to turn the boat upwind, and we will feel a definitive point when the boat goes from sailing very slowly without a significant amount of power to when the power really comes on, and that should be our starting point. Key point number 2, keep all your steering very smooth and very small movements with the rudders. Any big movements are going to result in big movements the other way, and the smoother that the boat is going, the faster that we're going to be able to do. Faster we're going to be able to go. Yeah, so if we sail into an area of less wind, we turn towards the wind slightly. Area of more wind, we turn slightly more downwind. And that is pretty much it for what course we're going to sail on the downwind. Of course, if the wind is lighter and we're just looking to get as much performance out of the boat as possible, perhaps we're sailing to a point which is across the wind, then yes, by all means, if you are able to fly the spinnaker on a course more of like a beam reaching or half wind course, then that's absolutely fine. But generally, when we're talking about sailing with the spinnaker, we're talking about sailing as deep and fast downwind as possible. So if we're sailing from this mark to this mark, then that is what we're going to be doing there. And then, of course, as the wind gets stronger, we're no longer able to sail a half wind or beam reaching course with the spinnaker up, because when we get to about this kind of course, we're going to have as much power on as we can possibly handle. So we're not actually able to sail any closer to the wind, because as we come up, the hull will lift. And if we come up more, the hull will lift so much that we'll capsize. So we are very much, when the spinnaker is up, the spinnaker is dictating which course we can sail. So if you're new to sailing up, make sure you've got loads of space and be prepared for having to sail in the course which the spinnaker dictates. You can't then sail exactly where you want to go unless you drop it again. So there we go. All right. Thanks very much for the question, Rich. I hope that was a good answer. I think it was pretty good. And I'm just going to check in with everybody who's checking in. Yes, we have had a bit of a restart in this session due to some sort of internet malfunction at my end. But I'd like to say hello to Jochen, channel member. Great to see you live again. Yes, great to be back live. And then he follows on after the restart. Nice to have you back. All right. Who else have we got on board? Storen. Thanks for the nice videos. My sailing exam is in 1 week. All right. Well, very good luck with that. If there's any help that you need with your sailing exam preparations, then this might be a good place to shoot some questions in. As I mentioned, we got Jens on board. Ryan is on board, who was just here a few days ago. Ryan is now in Norway. Lots of water here, just not getting in it because it is cold. All right. Nice to have you on board, Ryan, on your world tour. Okay, so next preloaded question. And this one is from Mats Kemp 72. And this was in response to the video of a burning lap on the C2 from Good Old Design. And this would be sort of similar to all of the videos that I've done on the F18 boats, especially in the strong wind in Vasiliki Bay. And the question is, why are the Dagger boards only halfway up the whole time? It's a very good question. So if we use our sort of, this is what our F18 is looking like. And yeah, so for this sort of, let's call it fun sailing or kind of blasting, when we're not, if the wind is strong and we're not sailing specifically round the course or training or racing, and we're just out for a fast sail, then it is much easier to sail the boat on a variety of points of sail with the dagger boards halfway up. That is because when we're sailing fast, the dagger boards are creating more lift, which means we can still sail at a reasonable angle to the wind. So if we had the dagger boards all the way down in a strong wind, we could sail pretty close to the wind. When we've got them lifted slightly, perhaps we can't sail quite as close. So if we were in a competitive environment, it wouldn't be the right thing to do. Just the other is so that we can go downwind again. Then I find it much easier. There's less to do and a lot less crew to do. I try to be kind to the crew whenever I can. And it makes the boat easier to sail, easier to handle, because we could think of the dagger boards in a similar way to having a second rig under the boat. So we've got our obviously got our sails up, but the dagger boards and the surface area of the dagger boards, they work kind of in a similar way to how the sails are working. So if we feel that the sails are too big, and let's say we're sailing on a yacht of some description or a keel boat, and we feel that the sails are too big, we can reduce the size of the sails by reefing to make the boat that much easier to sail, much more manageable. Well, on a catamaran with dagger boards, we can do exactly the same thing. If we feel that perhaps we are sailing upwind and every time we get a gust, the boat just leaps out of the water, that's because the amount of resistance that the dagger board is offering against the water makes the boat really twitchy. So if we lift them slightly, then yes, it's going to make the boat that much easier to sail. But just to our general dagger board positions on the different points of sail, it really is as simple as down for up for down, and half for half. Yes. But when we're saying up, we're not talking all the way up so there's no dagger board left. What we are doing with the dagger boards, how we've got them down for the downwind, is we want the same amount of dagger board under the boat as how much we've got rudder blade under the boat. So that is how much dagger board we're having on the downwind leg. And then when we're sailing downwind, if we feel that for the amount of wind, this is kind of referring back a little bit to the previous question. If we're feeling as we're sailing downwind, the boat really doesn't want to lift the hull, then perhaps that means that the dagger boards are lifted a little bit too high. So we could put them down a little bit, and then the boat will be encouraged to lift the hull a little bit earlier. In the same way, if we feel on the downwind that every time we get a gust, the windward hull leaps really high out of the water and the boat feels a bit out of control, then that would be because you've got too much dagger board in. So you could lift it out a little bit to make the boat more controllable. And then once you get a feel for the differences that the dagger boards make, that would be then a good time to start putting some marks on the board. So if this is our dagger board, you might have a mark there for sailing upwind in high winds. You might have, this is our standard downwind setting, and this might be our mega wind downwind setting, just so there's no guesswork involved, so you know exactly how much to pull the dagger boards up. There we go. All right, so dagger boards, yes. Course with the Spinnaker, yes. All right, we've got Philip tuning in sunny Ireland. Yeah, I've heard there's somewhat of a heat wave going on in Northern Europe at the moment. Perhaps it's just in the UK and Ireland, but maybe it's everywhere in Northern Europe. I should have a look on the weather forecast. Really. Philip says, I'm going to wet the bottom of my new to me Hobie Pearl on Monday. The boat is from 2010 and immaculate. I'm selling my Hobie 18 Formula centerboards version. So, are you in Ireland? Do you want to buy a Hobie 18 Formula? Philip's got one for sale. Yeah, there's a deal. All right. So, yeah, I'll just mention again for those of you tuned in at the start, apologies, but because of the restart, this will be different. Yeah, so yesterday I had a live one-to-one chat. Well, it was a 2-to-1 chat, but with Hamish Wilcox. He is one of the most decorated sailing boat racing coaches on the planet. And we were talking about how I could boost my results at the upcoming Tornado World Championships. And it was a extremely enlightening conversation that we had. And I recorded the conversation, and that is going to be going out on Joyrider TV on Sunday. So if you're into some racing and you want to get some insights into some strategies that you could use to boost your position on the race course, some great preparation stuff in there as well when you're preparing to go to an event, and what to do on match day to really maximize your results. That'll be going out at the normal time on Sunday. So keep an eye out for that one. Okay. All right. Back into the what you call it, preloaded. Okay, so this next question is coming from channel member Hussein in Egypt, who is saying half wind is the fastest point of sail. How do you compare close haul, close reach, and broad reach to each other? Okay, so here is one way of looking at it. Or before we have one way of looking at it, we could look at the kind of big picture of the speed on different points of sail. So if this is like the center of the speed, so if we're sailing upwind, we'll achieve this kind of speed. This is all relative. Straight head to wind, no speed at all. And then, of course, that would be the same on the other tack. And then as we come more to the beam reach, we'll start sailing much faster, and then possibly just down from a beam reach, even faster still. And then as we go on to a broad reach, we're slowing down a bit again. And then if we were to take the boat straight downwind, we'd be pretty slow. So we'd be kind of like, and I believe this is what's called a velocity kidney, because it's got this kidney kind of bean type shape. So the beam reach and just down of the beam reach are the fastest points of sail. Now, why is this? Well, one way we could look at it is if we're sailing in, let's say, as little as 10 knots of wind, and we're sailing on an upwind course, and we get all of our telltales, so we have the jib in tight, telltales flying perfectly, then the boat is going to start sailing faster. All right, so as the boat starts sailing faster, in fact, we're going to get rid of this. So here we are, upwind. Boat starts sailing faster because the sails are trimmed perfectly. We've got both telltales on the jib streaming straight back. So as the boat starts sailing faster, we get an increase in induced wind, which means the apparent wind is going to swing more round onto the nose, which means if we then want to continue to keep the telltales flying straight back, we're then going to need to bear away a little bit. So as we bear away, the boat is going to go even faster. So it's going to pick up more speed. And as we pick up more speed, our induced wind is going to get even more, which means once again, our apparent wind is going to come more round towards the nose of the boat, which means then if we want to keep the boat sailing with the telltales flying straight back, we then have to bear away more. And then I think you know what's going to happen here. And then as we sail here more, we get even more induced wind, which again means the apparent wind comes more round onto the nose, which means if we want to keep the telltales flying straight back, we'll then have to bear away more. And then we will get to a point like perhaps wind here. Well, still loads of induced wind, but because we're so far down for the true wind, the apparent wind isn't then coming so far round towards the nose. So then we're going to start slowing down as we come more down here, unless we're able to maintain one of these Joyrider TV style down the mine shaft speed runs. And the reason why the speed run is very fast is because we're taking the boat so far downwind, but keeping the sails in this effectively an upwind position, sheeted really tight in, hull in the air, but we've got very little drag. We've got a very high amount of lift from the sails, and that is when the boat's going at its fastest, if we're able to get so far downwind, just working this apparent wind machine to be able to get further and further downwind. So that is why the beam reach, another way we could look at it is, why is the beam reach, generally speaking, in like, so in lighter winds, like back to our 10 knots of wind, why is the beam reach the fastest point of sail? It's because on the beam reach, we really are presenting the biggest surface of sail to the wind, with the wind hitting the boat absolutely side on and getting this flow of air over both sides of the sail, which is then like almost like compressing like a bar of soap, which is firing the boat forwards. So there we go. Yeah, and on the downwind also, we're getting, as Hussein said, we're getting less drag from the waves as well. And on the upwind, we are going to be going slower. The wind is coming towards us. So the wind coming towards us is acting like a brake. You know, it's just, yeah, like a brake. There we go. So I think that is about the size of it for the explanation on that one, Hussein. Yeah, thanks very much for the question. All right, and back into the preloaded. Okay, so this one is referring to the Hobie 14 jibing video, which was out earlier this week, where we're looking at how we can jibe the boat in a strong wind, and kind of like how we can jibe the boat safely in a strong wind. So this question is from Erwan, who says, you are saying that it is better to have quite high speed just before the jibe, but can this method still be applied to an SL15 with a spinnaker? That's SL15 with a spinnaker would be the same rules as any catamaran with a spinnaker, basically, in the same conditions, because I think it can be more dangerous to get more speed than to jibe with a bit less speed. All right, so here we go. With heavy wind jibing, a way that we can look at it is, if we're sailing downwind, let's say the wind is 20, if 20 knots, let's even call that. If we're sailing at 10 knots, then that means the difference between our boat speed and the speed of the wind is 10. I've done this for easy maths. So that means that the actual pressure that is going to come in, if we're able to maintain that 10 knots when we turn the boat through the wind, that means when the mainsail comes across, there's going to be 10 knots of pressure that are forcing the sail out onto the new side. So if we can sail faster and maintain that speed, so if we can increase that to 15, then that means that when we jibe, I think we can see where this is going. When we jibe, we're just going to have 5 knots of pressure filling the sail on the new side. And then if we can go faster still, then we can have even less pressure when we jibe. This is why if we're sailing in waves, if we can get the boat onto a wave and then jibe on the wave, because we're getting the speed from the wave, the sail will go almost weightless, like there's no pressure in it at all as it crosses the boat, which really is one of the nicest jibes that you can do. But I think where not the confusion, but where the question is coming from is, a lot of the time it is seen that if we want to get more speed on the downwind, we need to turn more towards the wind. But this isn't what we're talking about, because what we never want to do before a jibe is get the apparent wind any further forwards than 90 degrees, our traditional catamaran sailor's angle. Because what we're trying to do, oh, except you're talking about spinnaker. Yeah, so what we're trying to do is have the smallest angle that we turn the boat through to jibe it. So the actual jibe the sail would jibe about here. So if we can have the boat sailing as far downwind as possible with speed going into the jibe, that is going to give us the best possible jibe in strong wind conditions. So how do we achieve this? Well, what we want to do is as we're coming downwind, we're going to experience variations in the wind strength. And the ideal is to take a gust. When we take that gust, like we spoke about earlier, we're going to take the boat further downwind just after the gust hits. And then when we've taken the boat downwind more, we're still going fast, but we're sailing much more in line with the true wind now. And after you've done your initial bear away in the gust, you'll get to a point where the boat will feel more stable. It will settle down a bit. And at that point, that is the point when we want to put the jibe in. It does require commitment. So you get the gust, you bear away, allow the boat to settle on the new course. And before the boat is allowed to slow down on this new course, that is the time to put the boat into the jibe, because we've got the smallest angle that we need to turn the boat through. Opposite would be, what is the worst time to jibe when it's windy? Is, like we said before, when we're sailing downwind, the gust that's going to influence us is kind of here. The worst time to jibe would be just before the gust hits us, because we've still got the maximum court angle that we have to turn the boat through. We're going to slow down as we go down into the jibe. And then just as the sail's about to come across, gust hits us. And that is going to be one of these jibes, which is the most violent kind of jibe, where we have this massive slam of the mainsail as it comes across. But for me, I would never jibe slowly, deliberately try to get the boat sailing slowly in a strong wind before the jibe, because then when we're sailing slowly, like we said before, we're going to have much more pressure in the rig of the boat, which means when the boat goes through the wind, it's going to slam through and it's not going to be particularly pleasant. So I'm going to sneeze. Okay. And yeah, if you watched the Hobie 14 jibing video, something else that was interesting that came out in that was where on the 14, which has got notoriously very little volume in the bows. So one of the most likely things to happen in a heavy wind jibe is when the sail fills, if we didn't have enough speed going into the jibe, then the bows are going to... I found myself doing out of kind of survival instinct video was, as soon as the sail filled in on the new side, as soon as it came across, I'd head up quite a lot, because once we've got to this kind of angle, our pitching force is transferred into more of a heeling force, and the heeling force we can definitely manage, whereas the pitching force, if it's there, then there's not much we can do about it, to be honest. So yeah, heading up, coming out of the jibe quite hard if we feel that the boat otherwise is going to dig the nose in. Cool. All right, so there we go. That is pretty much it. Very quiet in the Q&A in the live chat today. I think that might be something to do with the fact that the Q&A got reset halfway through due to internet. But thanks for tuning in.